Since October 2017, film producer Harvey Weinstein has received over 80 accusations of sexual abuse from various people working with him in Hollywood. In October, he released a statement to the New York Times that read, "I came of age in the 60s and 70s, when all the rules about behavior and workplaces were different. That was the culture then." This statement of his that somehow he was raised at a time in which such behavior was seen as normal or acceptable is the sort of thing that surely was a learned behavior, but it's also the sort of thing that frequently sees itself perpetuated by the people who are indoctrinated in it in the first place. And so it's not very surprising to see it emerging in some of their works. This brings to mind the 1981 film The Burning, which was not only produced by Harvey Weinstein, but also has a story credit given to him. Accusations toward the slasher genre regarding misogyny are nothing new, and they have certainly been challenged as being a tad too simplistic when over-applied. But maybe in the case of The Burning, there's something to it. Maybe there's something that makes this particular Golden Age slasher stand out with issues of misogyny that maybe were not necessarily true of the genre in general. One of the things that's worth considering is how the gendered relationships between characters express themselves in The Burning. By contrast, it would be worth considering how we see them in, say, John Carpenter's Halloween or in the first two Friday the 13th films. While in Halloween, the murders committed by Michael Myers are clearly associated with sexuality, and female sexuality in particular, connected with his older sister, Judith, at the beginning of the film. All of the sexual encounters are presented as completely consensual. They are presented in such a way that shows the young women actively desiring to be with their sexual partners. There's no sense that they are being pressured into it, coerced into it. And the only fault that Carpenter assigns to them for doing so is that they do so at the expense of responsibility toward the kids they're babysitting and so forth. There's no sense that the filmmakers are punishing them for being sexually active. So too in the first Friday the 13th, female sexuality is again presented as something that exists and is just as enthusiastic as male sexuality, even if the killer in that film is motivated by her frustration toward young people having sex. There's nothing particularly misogynistic about it. It's just, once again, irresponsible teenage behavior being the motive for the killer to move in. Unless both Halloween and Friday the 13th give you the sense that being a virgin is what makes you safe. We have in Friday the 13th Part 2 a lead character who is clearly not a virgin, who is in a sexual relationship and is never condemned by the film for it. And while the film does exhibit the only case out of the three in which at least one character is being sexually harassed by another, for the most part, once again, sexual relationships between men and women are shown to be mutual. And of course, these filmmakers behind these films were coming around at the same time as Harvey Weinstein would have been growing up. So it's not as if we have some progressive new idea stepping in years later. It's actually quite contemporary to have other filmmakers presenting these sorts of relationships in a way that is not misogynistic. However, in The Burning, we are encouraged from the beginning to feel some empathy towards Cropsey because he is the victim of a horrible prank. And when he gets out of the hospital and is completely deformed from the titular burning, he goes to a prostitute's home and finds himself rejected upon being seen. She is horrified, and he responds by murdering her. This is already a very different opening murder scene, because even though it uses the same POV technique as seen at the beginning of Halloween and Friday the 13th, We now have a good sense of who this character is before he goes to kill, and we're encouraged to empathize with him as he lashes out at this woman for shaming his deformity. We might be able to write that off as just a fluke if it were not for the pervasive misogyny that we see directed toward the female characters by practically all of the male characters throughout the story. We are given a character that we are supposed to empathize with, a young boy named Alfred, who, much like Cropsey, seems to be a victim of cruelty by bullies. However, once again, we're introduced to him by being encouraged to engage in his own voyeurism. He is watching a young woman named Sally showering, and we are encouraged to ogle her just as he is. And even though the characters declare him to be a sexual pervert, we are still obviously meant to sympathize with him, and by the end of the film, he is the one who has to be saved from Cropsey, giving him as close as we get to a Jamie Lee Curtis character role as the film offers. Speaking of Sally, her relationship with her boyfriend Glazer is once again presented as hostile and one-sided, with him constantly pressuring and even coercing her into sexual relations, taking her deflections when she would say later or maybe as a strong affirmation of consent, responding with "atta girl." Maybe even more disturbing is the relationship between Karen and Eddie. Karen is dating Eddie, but she expresses directly that she is afraid of Eddie. Not only afraid that she will become just another statistic in his womanizing, but even afraid that he will pressure and coerce her into sex. So she has an actual fear of being raped that goes to a point where the other counselors are willing to arrange a situation where she can leave if necessary. Note that they do not address his behavior directly. Eddie is not required to change his behavior. They just make an accommodation for Karen to have a way out of the situation. Eddie at one point tries to convince Karen to skinny dip with him, and Karen is obviously concerned because she does not want to be pressured into something that she is not ready for, and Eddie gives her the false sense that she will be perfectly okay if they just skinny dip. All they're going to do is swim, that's it. Then, of course, as soon as she gets out there, Eddie tries to force himself on her and then lashes out toward her with insults when she does not go along with it. If that's not bad enough, she is immediately killed afterwards by Cropsey, as if Cropsey is punishing her for not giving in. And all this raises the question of why in the world do we see all of these one-sided misogynistic dynamics between men and women in the film? It's not as if every single 80s slasher movie relationship has to be like this. So why do we not see healthy sexual relationships in The Burning? Is it just that the Weinsteins are convinced that that would be unrealistic? Are they trying to achieve what they believe is the way things really are? Are they trying to harken back to a dynamic that predates the sexual revolution and women's liberation? Or are they just channeling misogynistic ideas that they have already held and expressing it now through their depiction of the characters? If The Burning had offered any alternative look at male-female relationship dynamics, it might not stand out as much. And maybe it wouldn't be such a horrific reminder of Weinstein's own behavior towards 80-plus women over his career. But much as the presence of Rose McGowan in the Weinstein-produced film Scream is always now going to be tainted by the later accusations that she made toward Weinstein of rape, so too maybe The Burning, despite being a golden age slasher classic, will always have hanging over it from this point forward a degree of sleaze that perhaps we did not think to perceive in it beforehand. The film will still obviously be regarded for its impressive Tom Savini effects from now until eternity, but the sexual politics within have certainly dated it, and by this point seem like just another argument that that's the way things used to be, even though that's not necessarily the way things used to be.